New York, August 22. Tom Seaver speaks while Jerry Koosman and Nolan look on at a press conference commemorating the New York Mets' 40th anniversary of the 1969 World Championship team on August 22, 2009 at Citi Field in the Flushing neighborhood of the Queens borough of New York City. Photo by Jared Wickerham, Getty Images. The New York Mets have a deep and rich history of excellent starting pitching, especially considering that they've had so many bad teams in their relatively short, in baseball terms, existence. If time wasn't an object, which 5 arms should be plucked from the Mets' timeline to create the most amazing starting rotation? Let us begin our Mets all-time single-season starting 5 exercise with some simple ground rules. First of all, there needs to be a certain suspension of belief in the concept of time in order to put these pitchers of different eras, but similar eras, together. No big deal for a rising apple piece on a starting rotation based around the most impressive Mets pitching seasons, right? After scouring the Mets universe, I've personally handpicked the top 5 starting pitching seasons, in my eyes, at least, to fill out our starting rotation, with just one catch. And this catch happens to be our second ground rule. Since we're not ridiculous, we won't have any of our starters take up more than one spot in the rotation, no matter how many terrific, first-ballot Hall of Fame caliber seasons they may have put together. Meaning, basically, that, even though we're talking about the ultimate New York Mets starting pitching seasons, we can't just have Tom Seaver, who has the majority of those top starting pitching seasons, or any other hurler start every day, because that's just not how baseball works. Starting pitching has, seemingly, always been the focus and strength of the Mets. Throughout the franchise's history, they've had starting pitching at the forefront when they've had some measure of success. See 1969, 1973, 1986, 1988, 2000, 2006, and 2015. The Amazons' all-time single-season starting 5 may not be able to top a team as rich in starting pitching history as, say, the Dodgers, whose all-time single-season rotation might, without any actual research, look something like Sandy Koufax, 1966, Clayton Kershaw, 2014, Don Drysdale, 1963, Orel Hershiser, 1988, and Fernando Valenzuela, 1980, but I'm sure they can hold their own. So, without further ado, let's jump right in and find out for ourselves just what our beloved Mets all-time rotation looks like. Page 21988, Dwight Gooden of the New York Mets pitches during a game in the 1988 season. By Mike Powell, Getty Images. Dwight Gooden's signature season of 1985 was truly one for the record books. A year after taking New York and the sports world by storm as a 19-year-old rookie phenom, who seemed to be striking everyone out, his 11.4 K9 was more than twice the league average at that time, earning himself the surgical moniker, Dr. K. In the process, he was actually ready to kick it up a notch as a 20-year-old. Doc only needed 2 tools in his medical bag to perform surgery, an electric fastball and a ridiculous hook. These 2 brilliant tools were more than enough to slice up the National League in 1985, however. Although a case could be made that Dwight's fastball was actually 4 separate pitches. Hear me out. As overpowering as his dynamic fastball was, hitters could not cover the entire plate but would, rather, have to focus on a single side of the plate, or even quadrant of the strike zone. If you step into the box looking to turn on a high inside heater and he, instead, darts the corner low and outside, you're looking for the wrong pitch, even though both pitches are fastballs. Each quadrant was essentially a different pitch, and Gooden could throw gas to all 4 corners equally well in 1985, and if the good doctor was also controlling his diving curveball, you can just pack up and go home now because you don't stand a chance. The pitch was barely hittable, and if you did look out and make some kind of contact, it certainly wasn't anything resembling hard contact. I don't believe that they measured spin rate back in 1985, but it's just as well as Doc's curveball may have broken the machine. And then, of course, the 2 pitches played so well off of each other. Both coming from the same over-the-top arm slot with the same slinging arm motion. Yikes, Tommy Lasorda may have said it best when speaking about Doc in '85, calling Gooden that right-handed Sandy Koufax because of his wicked fastball-curveball combination. We certainly want to consider the showtime factor here as well. When Dr. K towed the rubber, it was an event and was easily the hottest ticket in town. In a town with a lot of options, everyone expected greatness every time out, and in 1985, what the shy kid from Florida lacked in charisma off the mound, he more than made up for when on it. Let's also not forget the fact that the kid, Gary Carter, stepped into the picture in 1985 and had a wonderful in-game influence on the young phenom, making Doc a more comfortable and confident pitcher. Gooden's new battery mate had caught the rookie in the All-Star game the year before, in addition to being named the game's MVP, and Dwight thrived, to say the least. This chance 1984 meeting, simply foreshadowing his 1985 success. A physical specimen, Gooden had the perfect pitcher's frame, tall and slim, with long, powerful legs, large hands, and an explosive right arm. His pitching motion was exaggerated but fluid and consistent. A high leg kick, even from the stretch where his left knee met his hands at shoulder level and danced briefly before they separated once again, opening up his hips and triggering his long, powerful right arm, propelled by his lower half, to whip over the top with either a lightning bolt or a looping knee buckler. Think fast, but the numbers paint a picture as well. In 1985, Doc led the National League with 24 victories, becoming the youngest pitcher ever to hit the 20-win plateau. 16 complete games, 276.2 innings pitched, 268 strikeouts, and a 229 adjusted ERA, 12th all-time, to go along with his 8 shutouts and 0.97 WHIP on the season. In recent years, many sabermetricians and major league executives alike have utilized WAR as the metric of choice to measure a player's contribution to the most important thing in baseball, winning games. A single, distilled number which rates a given player's value. Let's do the same to help us put Gooden's 1985 season in perspective by utilizing this measure. Gooden's WAR in 1985 was a whopping 13.3. Again, for perspective, this is the second highest single-season WAR in the last 100 years, behind only Babe Ruth's 1923 season, in which the Sultan of Swat had his personal single-season high in WAR at 14.1 and won the one and only MVP award of his mythical baseball career. And speaking of MVP awards, Drive. K finished 4th in National League MVP voting in 1985, so, when using WAR as a measure, Gooden's 1985 campaign, at 20 years old, rates higher than all but one of the great Bambino's seasons. Impressive. Maybe Doc should have been higher in the MVP voting. But we don't have to go back to 1923 to get perspective. Last season, Jacob deGrom won the Cy Young Award with only 10 wins on the entire season on the strength of his sterling 1.70 season ERA. ERA being deemed the most important stat to measure a pitcher by, because limiting earned runs is the most essential and crucial job a pitcher has. That being said, Gooden's 1.53 ERA in 1985 is the third lowest in the last 100 years, behind only Bob Gibson in 1965, a ridiculous 1.12 ERA, and Walter Johnson in 1919, 1.48 ERA. With all of the above considered, 1985 Drive. K has to be the ace of this staff. It has nothing whatsoever to do with the fact that my first big league ball game was Doc's 22nd win that season, in which he pitched 8 innings without allowing an earned run and hit his first major league home run against the Pittsburgh Pirates. Thanks, Mom. Gooden's 1985 campaign did eventually end, however, and the innocent young pitching star, with perhaps the best raw stuff in the history of the game that we knew and loved, never returned again. Instead, a combination of sky-high expectations, possible overusage, and partying clouded things on and off the field, no longer allowing his thoughts to simply revolve around baseball while also compromising his body in the process. Doc's career actually continued for another 15 years, during which he threw a no-hitter and won a World Series, both with the crosstown Yankees nonetheless, but was never the dominant pitcher he was in his first 2 seasons again. for the purposes of what we're looking for here. One magical season, however, 1985. Dr. K is the ace of my Mets staff every day of the week. Next, a Hall of Fame number 2, page 3, COOPERSTOWN, NY, July 24. Hall of Famer Tom Seaver is introduced at Clark Sports Center during the Baseball Hall of Fame induction ceremony on July 24, 2011 in Cooperstown, New York. Photo by Jim McIsaac, Getty Images. Let's say 1A in this instance, as it may prove difficult to justify a Hall of Fame pitcher nicknamed the franchise as anything but the ace of your staff. Tom Terrific was exactly that. Terrific. A cerebral power pitcher who could either overpower or outthink batters, he had, by far, the greatest career of any player in Mets history. Using his signature drop-and-drive delivery, Seaver simply overmatched batters with his low outside fastball while baffling them with his slider. And unlike the ace of this staff, Seaver has a quantity of quality with 12 All-Star seasons under his belt to choose from. Seaver was the National League Rookie of the Year, led his team to 2 World Series, winning 1 title, won 3 Cy Young Awards, led the National League in wins 3 times, and pitched a no-hitter. None of these accomplishments factor into this discussion, however, as we will be looking at the year that Tom Seaver got robbed. In 1971, Tom Terrific had, arguably, I'm making the argument right now, his best season in the majors. Fellow Rising Apple contributor, Tim Boyle, broke this very subject down not too long ago much better than I can, and a link to that piece can be found here. The facts as I understand them are as follows. In 1971, Seaver was a 20-game winner, leading the National League with his 1.76 ERA, 0.95 WHIP, 289 strikeouts, and 9.1 K9. The actual Cy Young Award winner that season, Fergie Jenkins, had 4 more wins than Seaver to lead the National League and also led the league with 325 innings pitched, 39 starts, 30 complete games, and 7.11 KBB. Meanwhile, Jenkins led the league in hits and home runs allowed that season as well. With an ERA more than a full point lower than Jenkins, a higher winning percentage, and more strikeouts and far fewer innings, Seaver would be an obvious winner if the voting was done today, I'm sure. But not so fast. That amount of workload, 325 innings, counts for something too, so let's not just dismiss the argument for Jenkins here. Fergie's 11.8 WAR in 1971 led the majors for all players. That would have to hold some weight with Cy Young and maybe even MVP voters. But alas, Seaver had an 11.0 WAR in 1971 himself, which was his career high and doesn't exactly put him very far behind Jenkins. All in all, it seems pretty close, but when the dust settles I think that, although it may not have been an actual robbery, Seaver still deserves to have been named King of the Hill in 1971. More importantly, however, for our purposes is how 1971 Tom Seaver compares to Tom Seaver of other Mets years. In 1971, Seaver had career bests in ERA, WHIP, complete games, strikeouts, K9, and KBB. Seaver had more wins in both 1973 and 1975, but his other numbers those 2 seasons were not quite up to par with 1971. Was 1971 Tom Terrific's finest single-season performance? I believe so. Was it his best by far? Hardly. In the end, it becomes a hair-splitting contest because what made the franchise so great was his amazing consistency, terrific numbers year in and year out. This is why he enjoyed the label as the Hall of Fame member with the highest percentage of votes at 98.8% until he was unseated by Ken Griffey Jr., who received 99.3% in 2006, and when all is said and done Tom Seaver is, again, quite obviously the greatest Met of all time, but just happens to take a backseat to Doc on our single-season base staff here. Next, a modern marvel at number 3, page 4, PHILADELPHIA, August 18th, Jacob deGrom. Photo by Rich Schultz, Getty Images. Who's ever heard of a 10-9 Cy Young Award season? Yeah, we all have. Just last season. Yes, DeGrom's dominance while everything seemed to crumble around him start after start, undermining his spectacular mound efforts time and again has been well documented, and fairly recently. But while wielding a high 90s fastball which he locates with ease, a solid curveball that he continuously sneaks over for strike one, a quality changeup that he can throw in any count, an exceptional slider to finish batters off with when he isn't using the high fastball at 97 mph to do so, and a two-seam fastball to round it all out, DeGrom has everything he needs to succeed on the bump, right? If only it was that simple and straightforward. DeGrom's starts were beautiful yet hard to watch all at the same time in 2018. Balancing the control, power, finesse, and mound control of DeGrom against the backdrop of stagnant defense, shaky defense, and an unreliable bullpen to hand the ball to. It was as if DeGrom's razor-sharp focus and determination caused his teammates to collectively lose theirs. Like they saw his greatness as just a set of coattails to be ridden and not a force to be utilized for a greater goal, winning games. Despite their worst efforts, the New York Mets did not prevent Jacob from walking away with his first Cy Young Award in 2018. The voters recognized that the only team truly capable of beating DeGrom last year was his own, and the Cy Young voters refused to hold it against him. But why would they? DeGrom's 1.70 ERA was the lowest in the National League by a wide margin. Combine that with a 0.91 whip and 11.2 K9 in 2018 and we're really getting somewhere. Meanwhile, his .4 HR9 paced the National League, his 10.2 WAR trailed only Mookie Betts and Mike Trout last year, and his 216 adjusted ERA is tied for 23rd all-time in MLB history for a single season. Wins no longer carrying the same statistical weight and clout as in the past, the voters were able to look beyond DeGrom's meager win-loss record and appreciate his work as a freestanding piece of art which was to be judged on its own merits, and not on the art gallery's horrible presentation of it or overall lack of support for it. Regardless of how poor his teammates played during his starts, DeGrom gave Mets fans a reason to care every fifth day. Even if it didn't usually last 9 innings and we only saw it for half of each of those innings, we truly witnessed individual greatness in Flushing last season which cements 2018 Jacob deGrom in the 3 slot for our all-time single-season Mets rotation. Next, underdog number 4 starter page 5 Street. Petersburg, FL, June 13, pitcher RA. Petersburg, Florida, photo by J. Moore at Getty Images, initially a traditional, non-knuckleball pitcher, RA. Dickey was drafted in 1996 by the Texas Rangers. He worked his way up to the bigs in 2001, but just couldn't stick. Bouncing between the minors and the big leagues while continuing to lose velocity each season due to the lack of an ulnar collateral ligament in his right elbow, Dickey turned to the knuckleball in 2006, reinventing himself 10 years after being drafted. Began his new knuckleball experiment in a 2006 big league start but gave up 6 homers in the process and promptly got sent back down to the minor leagues yet again. Dickey realized he would have to start from scratch and truly master this new pitch if he was going to stick around in baseball. After receiving some genuine expert knuckleball advice from Charlie Huff and Phil Niekro and call up to the majors by his new team, the New York Mets, in 2010, Dickey was ready to begin his ascent. That year Dickey started 26 games for the Mets and sported a 2.84 ERA over 174.1 innings and his confidence grew. Then in 2011, Dickey started 32 games over 208.2 innings, further honing his knuckleball prowess. Finally, in 2012 Dickey's knuckleball planets aligned. Dickey's transition from a solid major league pitcher his first 2 years with the Mets to a Cy Young caliber ace in 2012 caught fans by surprise. So much so that even the most optimistic Mets fan had difficulty including Dickey amongst the league's top arms in their minds. Sure, he did the same thing that they did, but he went about it differently. He was a knuckleballer. Just as the pitch itself is flighty and unpredictable, knuckleball pitchers often seem to be as well. Sometimes the pitcher controlled the pitch and sometimes it was the other way around. So, even when R.A., which I'm pretty sure stands for Rising Apple, got into his Cy Young groove, assuming that he'd keep it up all season may have been deemed a bit presumptuous at first. But he did. Gem after gem, Dickey separated himself from the knuckleball pitfalls of inconsistency and ineffectiveness that he had fallen privy to varying degrees in the past. Once Dickey worked the knuckleball's finer points out, he was also able to exploit its advantages. In addition to the dancing motion the pitch challenged batters with, he wasn't committing maximum effort to every pitch like most pitchers of the time. He was able to pitch more games while pitching deeper into those games because of it. He was also able to avoid injury due to less stress on his arm. Along those lines, Dickey led the National League in games started, complete games, shutouts, innings pitched, and strikeouts in 2012. He also won 20 games, finished with a 2.73 ERA and had a 1.05 WHIP. He had a 44 2/3 scoreless inning streak, which included back-to-back one-hit masterpieces. The first of which I witnessed in person in St. Petersburg against the Tampa Bay Rays. Dickey had finally become the Major League ace he always strived to be, even if his path was not the standard one. And Mets capitalized on his success, big time. Just a month after being named the National League Cy Young Award winner, the Mets completed a trade with the Blue Jays to ship Dickey to Toronto. And though it may have been an unexpected ending, for the Mets and their fans it was a happy one. The Mets received both current rotation anchor, Noah Syndergaard, and ever-popular Cy Young trade piece, Travis d'Arnaud, back from Toronto for Dickey. R.A., however, never again quite matched the 2012 magic that secured his place in Mets history and his place as the number 4 starter in the Mets' all-time starting rotation. Next, a southpaw for the 5th spot. Page 6 NEW York, August 22. Jerry Koosman speaks at a press conference commemorating the New York Mets' 40th anniversary of the 1969 World Championship team on August 22, 2009 at Citi Field in the Flushing neighborhood of the Queens borough of New York City. Photo by Jared Wickerham, Getty Images. Minnesota farm boy, Jerry Koosman, burst onto the scene as a rookie in 1968. After an impressive spring training that saw Koosman secure a spot in the Mets rotation, he was ready to hit the ground running once that 68 regular season gun sounded. And Koosman proceeded to set the tone for his rookie season early and often. He threw a shutout in his first start in 1968, followed that up with another shutout, then finally allowed a single run to go with 10 strikeouts in a complete game effort in his third outing. Jerry Koosman had arrived. More from Rising Apple, and this made fans of the lovable loser Mets take notice. It may have even sparked some hope for big things to come if they hadn't been trained to know better, or believe in miracles. The young lefty finished half of the games that he started in 1968 for a total of 17 complete games, 7 of those being shutouts. He went 19-12 to go along with a career-best 2.08 ERA and a 1.11 WHIP in his rookie season. Koos just missed out on winning the Rookie of the Year in 1968, 10.5 first-place votes to 9.5 first-place votes, finishing second in voting to the man that most people consider the greatest catcher in the history of the game, Johnny Bench. Koosman had a knack for playing second fiddle to all-time great Hall of Famers and certainly excelled in this role. But don't take this second fiddle thing the wrong way. Jerry Koosman was a fierce competitor on the mound who didn't back down from any challenge. Like his real-time rotation mate, Seaver, and unlike Gooden, Dickey, and Wickerham, Koosman had more than a few seasons to choose from for the purposes of this rotation, but in the end, I just couldn't pass up on Koosman's rookie campaign for the final spot in the Mets' ultimate starting five. Next, the Sixth Man Award. Page 7 San Diego, August 23. David Cone. Photo by Ken Levine, Getty Images. 20-3, 2.22 ERA, 1.12 WHIP, and 213 Ks. Second in Cy Young voting to Orel Hershiser and his 59 consecutive inning scoreless streak that season. The 1988 Mets squad also lost out to Cohn's nemesis, Hershiser, and the Dodgers in the NLCS, although Cohn did close out the Mets' victory in Game 3 and tossed a complete Game 5 hitter in Game 6 to force an elimination game after a sterling regular season. Matt Harvey 20,139-5, 2.27 ERA, 0.93 WHIP, and 191 Ks. After showing much promise in a brief 2012 stint, Harvey was the toast of the town in 2013. He started the All-Star game in Citi Field for the National League and came in fourth in Cy Young voting despite not throwing 200 innings in 2013, as Harvey suffered a UCL tear in August, missing the remainder of the season accordingly. Brett Saberhagen 199,414-4, 2.74 ERA, 1.03 WHIP, and 11.00 kBB. Saberhagen struck out 143 while only walking 13 batters in 1994. He finished third in the Cy Young voting that season, but his, and everyone's, season was cut short by the infamous but ugly 1994 player strike, limiting the quantity of innings Saberhagen would have needed to be a member of this staff. John Matlack 197,413-15, 2.41 ERA, 1.12 WHIP, and a 9.1 WAR for pitchers. A year removed from a World Series run, Matlack needed 7 shutouts to earn just 13 victories on the season. Johan Santana 200,816-7, 2.53 ERA, led NL, 1.15 WHIP, and 234.1 innings pitched also led NL, to go along with a 7.1 WAR for pitchers. Johan finished third in National League Cy Young voting in his first year with the Mets. Pedro Martinez 200,515-8, 2.82 ERA, 0.95 WHIP, led NL, and a 7.0 WAR for pitchers. Almost classic off Pedro in his inaugural season with the Metropolitans. Next, best Mets players to wear everyone jersey number. Want your voice heard? Join the Rising Apple team. Write for us. What would your all-time Mets rotation look like? Page 8. Let's be honest, not many of us knew much about Luis Avilan. After 7 seasons in the big leagues with 4 different teams, you might think the name would be a little more familiar. The New York Mets reliever, while owning a name we sort of recognized when they inked him to a minor league deal, didn't exactly stand out for many of us. Despite 3.5 years with the Atlanta Braves, a presence on the 2016 and 2017 Los Angeles Dodgers teams, and wrapping things up with the Philadelphia Phillies in 2018, he was just a name. If you're like me, you assumed because he was willing to sign a minor league deal that it meant his numbers were short of fantastic. Then I took a look at them. Avilan may end up as the bargain signing of the offseason. Or from Rising Apple, with a minor league deal in tow, Avilan can get cut by the Mets without suffering significant financial consequences. Of course, the Mets should prefer he pitches well in spring training and at the very least earns a roster spot with the Syracuse Mets to begin the year. When the Mets signed Avilan, Justin Wilson was just a member of the offseason wish list. Daniel Zamora was the best option on the roster.